All right. It is 9:30. We'll go ahead and we'll get started. It's good to see everybody here this morning. We're going to be continuing our study or kind of an overview of the book of Psalms. So if you're just joining us, we have been working through 9 categories that we might divide the Psalms into. Again, these are categories that these categories don't exist in the Psalms. Like you can't go and say, "Oh, well, I want to see where David said, I'm going to write a song of lament. I'm going to write a penitential psalm." These are just ways that we would categorize those psalms. And so a lot of people kind of cut them up, slice them up into different ways. This particular grouping is from Mike Mazzalongo. Mike operates BibleTalk.tv. A lot of really good lessons there. You can go out on your own if you want to get into deeper study. But this is one of the beginner lessons on that website. And so we have been working through. We've worked through the wisdom Psalms, the idea of the experience, where does wisdom come from? What does it look like? The character Psalms, who is worthy to worship God? We've looked at nature Psalms, how does nature proclaim the wonder of God? We have looked at praise Psalms that extol the creative acts of God, the providence of God, His continuing sustainment of not just of His creation, but also of man. We've looked at Word of God Psalms. We looked at Psalm 19 and Psalm 119, how both of those lift up the Word of God, and there are a lot of different synonyms that are used for the Word of God in there. And last week we looked at penitential Psalms. And so just kind of as a brief reminder, the penitential Psalms, we see a kind of a progression. We would see typically a cry for help, and then we would see a statement of the condition of the one who is crying for help, whether they're sick, or they are being oppressed, or they are suffering consequence of their own sin. And then after that statement of the problem, the statement of their condition, then there is a renewed request for help from God. Typically it is a restatement of the first part of the psalm. And so this morning we want to look at the worship psalms. So from the beginning of time, God and man, they've always had a place where they've been able to meet in order to carry out their relationship. So you think, with Adam and Eve, they have the garden where they meet with God. It is it's an informal setting, right? There's an indication that the relationship that Adam and Eve had with God was very personal. It was rather somewhat informal. So they have this relationship that exists, but then they're expelled from the garden following their sin. And so from that point forward, we now see the relationship between God and man. From Adam's descendants on, that relationship changes. The way that they meet God changes. Now we have a sacrifice that is going to stand between man and God. And so that sacrifice is going to, from that time forward, is going to be an ever-present reminder of the consequence of sin, that sin stands between man and God. Now, he's still meeting with God, but there's always that reminder of sin and death that goes along with it. Then, many centuries later, we have the ushering in of the Mosaic covenant, the Mosaic law, if you will. Moses is going to build this tabernacle in the desert according to God's instructions. And so now God is seen as dwelling among the people. So now it's not just that we are traveling to wherever God is, but now God is dwelling with us in the tabernacle. And so they would move the tabernacle to follow after to God, if you remember. But again, we still have this reminder, right? We still have the priesthood that is offering sacrifice for the people to God for their sins. So now the people are somewhat removed from God. They approach God through the priest, but there is still this sacrifice that stands between the people and God. But they're not having to search for him because now he is among them. And so as the Israelites settle in the promised land, there's now this desire to not be nomadic, right? They want to build a temple, a permanent meeting place between God and themselves. So David is the first to desire to want to build this permanent house for God, the temple. God prevents David from doing that. Why? Why did God prevent David from building the temple? That's right. He was a man of blood, violent, had blood on his hands. He was a man of violence. 1 Chronicles 22, verses 6 through 9, you can read about that. And so it's given to Solomon, to his son. And so Solomon is going to be the one to actually complete this task. Now, David had prepared all of the materials. Remember, David had actually gathered all of the materials during his life, but Solomon is going to be the one to actually erect the temple. And so under his supervision, this temple is established and built in Jerusalem. It's going to be around 931 BC. So over 900 years still before Christ is going to come to the earth to establish a new way for man to come to God. We have the temple being built in Jerusalem. Now, the temple represented many things to the Jews. First of all, it symbolized God's continual presence among the people, right? So they had the tabernacle, and they had the glory of God as kind of was over the tabernacle. It existed there between the angels on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, all right? But now we're not moving around from place to place. Now we have a permanent home. This was looked at as an affirmation that the Israelites were God's chosen people, right? Because God dwelt among them. But again, we have this continual reminder, because the temple is there, the priests were making even the daily sacrifices in the temple, let alone all of the ritual sacrifices that were made on certain occasions throughout the year. You have this daily reminder of the sins that are being dealt with before God. But also remember, we tend to separate in our minds the government, right? How the people are governed, and then how the religious matters are governed. That distinction was blurred for the Israelites. Though a lot of times there was a lot of overlap between those two things. And so with the Israelites, this having the temple, having Jerusalem established as a permanent capital, I guess, if you will, of the nation, it established in their mind the legitimacy of the king, right? There is a connection between who God has appointed as the king and where God dwells among the people there in Jerusalem. So the temple would have been located there, and so it's creating this dual significance in the minds of the people. And the temple's presence validates the throne, and the throne's location confirms the divine link between the King of Israel and the God of the Jewish people. Now, the Jews had 7 major feasts throughout the year, and the temple is the focal point for each of those. Before the establishment of the synagogues, where people had the places where they would meet to worship in their smaller cities where they lived, the temple in Jerusalem was where everybody would go to especially for these large celebrations or for these large worship gatherings or meetings with God. And so these feasts would have drawn thousands of Jews from throughout Israel into the city to the temple. It even would have brought pilgrims in as well. Now, the 7 feasts, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but you had the Feast of the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Booths. So again, each time these came in, you would have had people from the surrounding areas coming into the city. Some of them would be making annual pilgrimages. You think about when Joseph and Mary in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. So Jesus has already been born, and they're coming into the city. They're coming to the temple. This would have been an annual pilgrimage for them, right? But for some people, coming to Jerusalem, coming to the temple, it might have been a once-in-a-lifetime trip for them. You think about the Queen of Egypt, the Queen of Sheba, when she comes during the days of Solomon, probably a once-in-a-lifetime trip. The Ethiopian eunuch that we read about in Acts chapter 8. You remember the conversion account there with Philip and that eunuch. It says he was returning from Jerusalem. He had gone to Jerusalem to worship. The distance that he is traveling there, that may have been a once-in-a-lifetime kind of trip for him. So it would have had great significance. So the fact that there is a physical temple, right, for people to go to, it would have had great significance in the minds of the people. So many of the Psalms are written with that in mind, about the idea of traveling to Jerusalem, to the temple to worship. Or the Psalms are written about the experience of worshiping at the temple. And so this morning we're going to look at a couple of Psalms, but these would be considered worship Psalms. So the first one we're going to look at is Psalm 24. Now Psalm 24 is actually, again, it's going to deal with 2 different themes. And we see this a lot in the Psalms. When we looked at Psalm 19, there was a wisdom component of Psalm 19, and then there was a Word of God component to the Psalm. Same thing is going to be true here in Psalm 24. We are going to have a wisdom component of this Psalm, and then we are going to have a worship component of the Psalm. This is what would be considered a character, as far as the wisdom, it's character. It's who is worthy to worship God. Right? How should a man live in order to approach or be worthy of being in the presence of God? So we start in verse 1. The earth is the Lord and all it contains, the world and those who dwell in it. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Now, pop quiz. We've been talking about the existence of parallelism throughout the Hebrew poetry. These would be an example of what type of parallelism? Anybody want to hazard a guess? No guesses. Synonymous parallelism. This would be synonymous. Look again, see how at these lines, as they're broken down, the first and the second stick are basically saying the same thing. They're just saying it in different words. The earth is the Lord and all it contains. The world and those who dwell in it, saying the exact same thing. He has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Again, he's saying the same thing, just in 2 different ways. And so he's going to begin by establishing God's sovereignty and position as creator. The earth is the Lord's, and he has founded everything upon the seas or the rivers. Going on, who may ascend into the hill of the Lord? And who may stand in his holy place? Again, this is the wisdom psalm is going to answer the question, who can go up to the city? Who can meet with God and worship him in his holy place? Verse 4, he answers the question. He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to falsehood and has not sworn deceitfully. He says it's somebody who is holy in what he does, in the works of his hands. It's somebody who is holy in his thoughts, in his mind, right? He says a pure heart. This is somebody who is sincere towards God. He has not lifted up his soul to falsehood, but not only is he sincere towards God, he is also sincere in his dealings with other men. He says he has not sworn deceitfully. Verse 5, he shall receive. So we ask the question in verse 3. He answers the question in verse 4. And what is the result of that? In verse 5, he says, he shall receive a blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This person is going to be considered righteous before God. And that's his blessing from God that saves him. And that righteousness is what enables him to stand before God or to worship God at the temple. And so then he's going to make kind of an all-encompassing statement about the people who fit this description. This is the generation of those who seek him, who seek your face, even Jacob, Selah. Now when he says this is the generation, he's not trying to say, okay, it's only the people who are alive right now in this specific generation. He's using this idea of generation in a more encompassing sense, right? He is saying, who is it that's worthy to worship God? Well, it's the generation of people who are pure in heart, who have clean hands, who do not lift up their soul in falsehood, who do not swear deceitfully. And he equates them to Jacob. All right, if he is equating them with Jacob, then that means they're Jacob's sons, and by implication, they are the true sons of Abraham. You remember when Jesus is on the earth, what was one of the things that a lot of times the Pharisees and the Jews would claim about their heritage? That's right, we're Abraham's children. We're sons of Abraham, right? And they're again thinking in a familial, a blood sense that we're the children of Abraham. And Jesus is constantly having to correct their thinking that the children of Abraham, the sons of Abraham, are those who worship God faithfully. Right? Those who are righteous, those are the children of Abraham. And Jesus goes so far as to say that if God wanted to, he could raise up children to Abraham from what? Even from the stones, right? That if he wanted to, he could raise up children to Abraham from those stones. And so those are the kinds of people, according to the psalmist here, that they want to come and worship God. And so now we're going to go to the balance of the psalm, verses 7 through 10. This is where we get into the worship portion of the psalm. This part of the psalm is written in what is called an antiphonal style. That means kind of like a call and response. We actually have a lot of songs have been written this way. I won't sing any of them because they're not religious in nature. But typically, what happens is you have the singer. He sings part of the melody, and then you have a chorus, or you'll have backup singers, or the audience will reply back with something that matches what is being said. And that's what's going on here in verses 7, 8, 9, and 10. We're going to have this call and response going back and forth. This would have been between the people as they approached the gates of the city. They're approaching the gates of Jerusalem. There's some thought that this may have actually been associated with David and the event in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 12 and 15, where he is bringing back the Ark of the Covenant. They had lost the Ark of the Covenant to the Jebusites, and it has now been recovered. And so there's obviously joy that goes along with recovering the Ark. So now they're physically bringing it back into the city. And as they approach the city, this is verse 7. This is what the company would have said as they approached the gates. They would have said, "Lift up your head, O gates. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." There's like a statement, a demand that you open the gates. The sentries are going to reply from within. Who is the King of glory? Right? You come in here and you just say, "Open the doors that the King of glory may come in." Well, there's a question you need to answer. Who is the King of glory? The response is, who is the king? Is it David? No. They said the Lord, strong and mighty. The Lord, mighty in battle. The Lord is the King of glory. He is the one who has provided the strength in battle, and He is the one who has provided victory through that strength. So the statement is demanded again. "Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." And the sentries are going to reply one more time, "Who is the King of glory?" And the response, "The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory." The word Selah there at the end, it appears 70 some odd times in the book of Psalms. The exact meaning of this is not known. I guess we would say that the two main thoughts on this are that either one, it's kind of a command to the reader to pause and to reflect. What was that? An interlude, right? And so one of the other thoughts is that this is a musical notation, right? It's there, it's written for the singers. Again, it may be a pause for emphasis or something like that. Right, like a break between verses, Brother Ernest said. So the psalm here, right, it's not only praising God, but it's describing the types of activity that are surrounding worship, right, as they're approaching the gates. Let's move on to Psalm 84. So turn over to Psalm 84. So if you're wanting kind of a template for a worship psalm, Psalm 84 would be a good one. There is some difference of opinion as to what prompted the writing of Psalm 84. Is it that the author wanted to travel to Jerusalem to worship, and he has been prevented from traveling? And so this is it is a lament in not being able to go, but it is still a psalm of worship in describing the psalmist's his emotions, his feelings, his desire to go to Jerusalem to worship. Or is this kind of a memory? The psalmist is thinking back on a recent trip to Jerusalem, to the temple to worship. So just whichever one it is, we're going to kind of arrive at the same place. But it's going to succeed. It's going to describe the joy that the pilgrim feels as he visits and worships at the temple in Jerusalem. So we'll begin. Verse 1, "How lovely are your dwelling places, O Lord of hosts! My soul longed and even yearned for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God." The author he's expressing that he can't wait to get to the temple. He cannot wait to get to Jerusalem to be at the place where he can worship God. Now, his desire is not necessarily for the place itself, right? It's the desire of the experience of being in the presence of God. Continuing in verse 3, the bird also has found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young. Even your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God, how blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you. Selah. Do the words of this psalm sound familiar? What does it remind you of? Right, we have a song, right, that we sing, My God and King, how beautiful are your dwelling places, O Lord. And as the swallow longs for her nest, so long I after you. So the inspiration for My God and King comes from Psalm 84. Brother Constantine Juglin wrote that song inspired by this particular psalm. And so you'll see as we go through this, there are going to be a lot of phrases and images that are almost word for word or very closely paraphrased in that song. But notice he says, the bird has found a house, the swallow a nest, even your altars, O Lord. How blessed are those who dwell in your house. The temple of God is providing safety, not just for it. I mean, it's providing safety for even the birds of the air, right? Birds they'll build a nest anywhere, right? I mean, if there's a corner, anywhere, the eaves of your house, our house, we have stucco siding on it. And, so stucco is very rough, has little, protrusions from it. We have birds that they'll take the smallest protrusion from that stucco and they'll start building a nest out of it. The temple is providing safety even for the birds of the air, but it also is providing safety, or it's providing for those who come to the altar. Those that are coming to worship God, who are seeking reprieve from their sins. And so he says, how blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are always singing the praises of God. They're each finding a place and a way to belong, to be comforted. Verse 5, how blessed is the man whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Passing through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. The early rain also covers it with blessing. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them appears before God in Zion. He thinks about the difficulties of this trip. But even the difficulties of the trip in his mind are very, very small when you compare them with the emotional payoff, we might say, the experience when you finally get to Jerusalem, to the temple, and you get to worship God. The valley of Baca, it's translated, it means the valley of weeping, the valley of tears. It was kind of a dry stretch of land on the journey to Jerusalem where you didn't really have any watering places. And so it's very poetic here, right? He says, passing through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. That he's saying, even when I'm going through a dry land, even when I'm going through a place where, maybe physically there's not a lot there to sustain me, it's as if I were just in the middle of a spring of water, because my heart is set on God. My heart is set on getting to where God is and experiencing the worship of my Creator. How many of you go home for the holidays? Go home for Christmas? Anybody? It's just us? Just me and Gina. Okay. So everyone else lives here. All your family. So Gina and I didn't grow up here. right? So in a few weeks, we're going to go home, so to speak, to my family and to Gina's family. You think about if you ever moved away from home for a while, right? You went several months without seeing your family, without being in your hometown. And as it gets closer and closer for you to make your trip, how do you feel? You're anxious about it. You're excited about it, right? And so then the day finally comes that, all right, we got everything loaded up into the car. We're on our way home. It's like we're finally going there. If it's a long trip, when you first get started, you kind of have your mind set. Okay, this is a long trip, but I'm excited to get there. Can't wait, right? Really want to be there. But then at some point, you begin to see familiar landmarks, right? When you see that first landmark, now how are you feeling? Right? It's like, okay, I know it's close now. And then you get into, maybe you get into the city limits, or there's the little country store that you go past, and you know your turn is coming up. And then you make the turn, and now you're looking for that gravel road, and then you see the gravel. And there are these landmarks in your mind, and as you get closer and closer to your destination, your anticipation builds, right? Because it's not just the place that you're going to, it's all of the memories and emotions that you have attached to that place, right? That are inside of you. And so when you finally get there, there's a kind of a resolution of that anxiety, of that anxiousness, right? When you finally get there and you get to be with the people that you've wanted to be with. Well, here the psalmist is kind of trying to get us to think along those lines. He's saying, I'm headed to Jerusalem to worship God, right? He says, blessed is the man whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Again, a poetic way of saying this is a person who the paths of their heart lead them back to God. Wherever God is, that's where they want to be. And he says they go from strength to strength. Every one of them appears before God in Zion. How do we feel when we come to worship? You know, do we, as we get closer and closer to the Lord's Day each week, do we feel a sense of anticipation building within our hearts? Or the day of worship, as we prepare ourselves in the morning, are we feeling a greater anticipation as we approach worship? And in a bigger sense, all of us are moving towards that great and final day of the Lord, right? We're all looking forward to the final appearing of Jesus. As our lives progress, are we anticipating that more and more? Or are we not feeling that anticipation? Because if I'm not feeling that anticipation, there may be some things that I need to be checking internally, right? If I'm not excited about getting to worship God, if I'm not excited about being one day closer to being with Jesus and with God for eternity, I may need to do some internal reflection. Right? The psalmist here, he does not have this problem. He wants to be where God is. Continuing on, verse 8, he says, O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Behold our shield, O God, and look upon the face of your anointed. Now, again, we talked about messianic psalms. The psalmists, when they wrote the psalms, they were not writing a messianic psalm. David wasn't sitting there and he wasn't writing this psalm and saying, this psalm is about the Messiah. The Psalms were written for then. And so when he says, behold our shield, O God, and look upon the face of your anointed, we look at that on this side of the cross, and we can say, oh, our shield is Jesus. Oh, the anointed of the Lord is Jesus. Well, yes, he is. But when this was written, who was the Lord's anointed? In the mind of the Jews, who is the Lord's anointed? The king. The king is the Lord's anointed, and the king is God's shield for the people. The king represents the strength and protection of God to the people. All right? And so this is his, so he is kind of talking about the king as the shield, as the anointed of God, that it is through the king that God protects his people. And again, we have more synonymous parallelism going on here. O Lord, hear my prayer, give ear, O God. And so the pilgrim here, he's praying for blessing and the protection of the king or of the Lord's anointed, because it's through the agency of the king that the pilgrim is going to be able to make this pilgrimage and come safely to worship. Now, and again, there is a messianic parallel here. Jesus is the Messiah, the anointed one, and he is our king, and he is our shield or our protector. But in a minute, we're going to see, again, how the psalmist is going to help resolve this idea of the shield. Continuing in verses 10 through 12, he says, for a day in your courts is better than 1,000 outside. I would rather stand at the threshold of the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord gives grace and glory. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, how blessed is the man who trusts in you. The pilgrim he's finishing this psalm with praise for the one who occupies the temple. He is giving praise for the one who is causing the pilgrimage to be joyful in the first place, who makes it satisfying, who makes this pilgrimage possible. It's interesting, I think, here where he says, a day in your courts is better than 1,000 outside. And he says, I would rather stand at the threshold of the house of God rather than dwell in the tents of wickedness. The word dwell, okay, it carried with it some sense of permanence. It carried with it a sense of having a place to belong, a place to live. Okay? And the psalmist is saying, I would rather not have a place to live if it means that I get to just be at the threshold of the door of God. Right? That's how important it is to him. And so he's going to complete this psalm. He's going to reflect on why he, the psalmist, the pilgrim, why is he full of joy? Lord of hosts, how blessed is the man who trusts in you. Comments here, thoughts before we move? All right, well, let's go. We're going to look at one more. Let's look at Psalm 122. Psalm 122. This would be another pilgrim song, again describing the feeling of someone that's coming to Jerusalem and to the temple. It may have the title, The Joy of Going to the House of the Lord. Now again, that would not have been the title. That's something that the English translators have added to maybe to give us a sense of what the psalm is about. But where it does say a song of ascents, of David. That would have been in the text. Verse 1, let's advance my slide here. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Again, the writer he's talking about these feelings of anticipation, right? He's preparing to travel. When he finally gets to Jerusalem, he finally arrives at the place where he is pilgrimaging to. Verse 3, Jerusalem, that is built as a city that is compact together, to which the tribes go up, even the tribes of the Lord, an ordinance for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For their thrones were set for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. He's going to take some time to just think about the history of the city of Jerusalem. The layout of the cities is compact. The meaning of this city and the beauty of the temple. The significance of the activities that are going on there. The ministry of the priests, again, offering those sacrifices for the people. He's giving thanks for the rulership that has come from the beginning with David, according to God's promise, and in the mind of the psalmist will go on forever. Again, he's thinking in an earthly sense, because that is typically the sense that the Israelites would have thought about the throne of David, that they would have thought about the city of the great king. And so Jerusalem is this eternal city of God. He's in awe of it when he finally arrives at the destination of his pilgrimage. I know I've told some of you this story before. Again, if you've been to a place of great natural beauty, right? Pictures don't do it justice. And if pictures don't do it justice, then words, trying to describe it in words to somebody, even less so. I've told you the story. I had a friend of mine growing up that he had never been to the ocean. And for our senior year, after we had graduated, my family, we always went down to the ocean every summer. And so we were going to take him with us. This was going to be his first time to see the ocean. And I can still remember, him, the way it was situated is you went into a tunnel, and you went under the highway, and you walked along the tunnel, and then you came out of the tunnel, and you came up into kind of this gazebo on the beach, looking down at the ocean. And I remember my friend, he came up and he looked, and he just stopped. He just stared. He said, "Wow. Wow." And that was all he could get out in that moment was, wow. Again, it is, it's the words did not do justice to the real thing. Remember when the Queen of Sheba, when she came to see Solomon? What did she say about the city, the city of Jerusalem and the temple? The half was not told to me, right? I came because of what I had heard, and when I got here, the only thing I can say is they didn't even tell me half of what was going on, how magnificent this place was. And so, again, you think about the first time that somebody makes this pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the temple. How awesome must it have been? They've grown up hearing about the temple, hearing about the city of Jerusalem. They've grown up worshiping God. And now we're going to go. And the first time, I don't know if you crest a hill or whatever it is, you see it for the first time. To take that in must have been an awesome sight. And so the psalmist here, he's saying he's finally arriving at the destination of his pilgrimage. And so now he's going to continue this prayer. He says, he's come to worship God, But now he's overwhelmed not just with this idea of worshiping God, but he's overwhelmed with just, the significance of the city and the temple. And so now he says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. May peace be within your walls and prosperity within your palaces. For the sake of my brothers and my friends, I will now say, may peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. He came with the intention of praying and rejoicing before God, but now he's moved even to offer a blessing on the city itself. And so he's praying that peace is going to reign over Jerusalem, that a blessing is going to be given to those who love the city, those who prosper the city. And he's even going to deepen his own commitment to serve it, and by extension, serving the one who preserves the city, who preserves the temple, God. So here we have, again, in this psalm, we have a man who has come to the temple with a joyful heart, and he's moved by the presence of God. We might say to rededicate himself, kind of like, when people come forward in services today. A lot of times when people come forward, it's usually to rededicate themselves in some way. And so, a lesson that we can draw for ourselves out of this psalm is, when we take in the magnificence of God, we ought to feel an impulse to rededicate ourselves to God and to the kingdom of God. I think we're out of time. I haven't heard the bell. Thoughts here before we close? Yeah. Brother Ernest says it's kind of like when you charge a battery, right? We come back together, and the energy comes back to us. Very good. Yes. Yes. Yeah, Sister Karen said that she had a note there that, it's about our attitude towards God, and it's our choice how we worship. And so we're going to have an opportunity here in about 12 or 13 minutes to choose our attitude as we enter into worship. Appreciate your presence.